I know that you see rather a lot of bread making in this on this YouTube channel, and that you're probably thinking, why doesn't she do something different? Thing is, we get through, well, a lot of bread. It's like a few of us in the house. It's like 5 of us in the house, 4 of us. So I need to make bread continuously, and I don't like the bread that I find in the supermarket here, because the bread around here in Umbria and also in Tuscany goes dry very, very fast, and doesn't taste like much because, well, first of all, the flour that they use is not my favorite kind of flour, but that's another story for another day. But the traditional bread of this area is without salt. Now, the reason that it's without salt, I will tell you the real reason at the end of the video, but the traditional reason that we give for why we don't put salt. So the story that you hear the most of why we don't put salt in the bread here is because of the salt wars. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, I'm gonna get started. So, salt wars I was telling you about. Well, first of all, there's been many more salt wars than you probably imagine, because salt is something which is very precious and worth a lot of money in olden days. I know today it's like really cheap. You go to the supermarket and you just get salt, unless it's like Himalayan salt, then it's very expensive. But it's very difficult to imagine just how expensive salt was in the past and how much worth it was to fight over, you know. Just to give you an idea, the word salary comes from salt. The word sales comes from salt. So salt was literally a currency in olden times. Before money, salt has been, in fact, a currency, and it has been something which has been highly taxed as well. And this is the reason for a lot of the salt wars which have happened throughout history. We've had a salt war in it, just in Italy, like we've had a salt war in the 1300s between Venice and Padua. Then there was another one in the mid 1500s in Ferrara. There's been one in the 1600s, I believe, between Naples and Papal States. Papal States are always at war. Like in Italian history, like Papal States always get involved in wars when it comes to salt. There was actually, I discovered this just recently, there was a salt war even in the 1800s in the United States. So there was a whole rebellion there concerning salt, and apparently there was these salt lakes which had been like belonging to the people, and someone else wanted to privatize them, like the state wanted to privatize them, and so there was a massive rebellion against the fact that the state wanted to privatize these salts, which had always been accessible to everyone. So I found that very interesting, that that was so recent and that it happened also in the US. However, what I want to tell you about today is the salt war that I think of. When I think of salt war, I think of the salt war that happened like just literally on my doorstep. I live near Perugia, and Perugia was very, very much involved in this salt war. Well, it was the protagonist of the salt war, really, that I'm going to tell you about today, which was in 1340. So let me also, you know, cook too. Perugia was Papal State. Just as a reminder, Italy, up until its unification, which was a whole 2 minutes ago, it was unified very late compared to the rest of Europe. Perugia was part of the Papal State, which was one of the states into which Italy was divided up until the mid 1800s. Okay, so Tuscany was its own state. The Papal States was its own state. There was a lot of little states that kind of combined together and once unified made Italy. The Papal States were around until the mid 1800s, as I said. So I know that a lot of people are very surprised when I tell them about that. For us Italians, it's normal, right? But when people come here, they always find that very surprising. And Perugia was part of the Papal States right until the Italian Republic, the Italian Kingdom rather, included it, and the Papal States were among the last to be included into Italy. Okay, this is going to be interesting because at the end of all of this, you will see how the people of Perugia behave. And how much they will remember this salt war even the day that they get unified to the rest of Italy. Okay, so Perugia is part of the Papal State. The Pope, the Papacy, within its Papal States, requires that people pay a certain tax on salt and that they purchase salt only from the Papacy, who had the monopolium over salt. Okay. This is very, very important. The Pope loves having monopoliums during the Renaissance period over anything it can get its hands on. However, Perugia had a special dispensation which was granted in the 1430s, 1431. This special dispensation meant that even though Perugia was in the Papal State, it was allowed to purchase salt from whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted, and however they wanted. Okay. Now, during the papacy of Pope Paul III, this threatens to change. Okay. Now, first of all, Pope Paul III is quite a character, all right? I think we talked briefly about him on when we talked about Michelangelo, because in another video we talked about how Pope Paul III and Michelangelo were quite good buddies. Pope Paul III is an interesting character because he can be pretty open-minded, but he is also very, very strong-willed and knows how to impose his power. Now, to give you an idea, his is the family of the Farnese. The Farnese start out as combat people, okay? They're people that serve other nobility. They're people that serve below the nobility as fighters. But they slowly build their power up by marrying in the right places and by supplying kind of other romantic services, you could say, okay? So when he was still actually before he was even a cardinal, his name was Alessandro Farnese. This is before Pope Paul III becomes Pope. He is Alessandro Farnese. And at the time of the Borgia, we will talk more extensively about them another time, his young, beautiful sister, Giulia Farnese, which is nicknamed Giulia la Bella, he basically sells her off to Pope Alexander VI for in exchange of becoming cardinal. In fact, he was nicknamed the Cardinal of the Skirts, because it was said that it was only thanks to the skirts of his sister and the skirts of other women in his family that he was able to obtain his position as a cardinal, okay? Later on, thanks to playing his cards particularly right and to basically selling off his, underage sister, which is gross, he is able to become a pope. But I think that when people placed him in that position, when they elected him, they were kind of under the impression that he wasn't going to last very long. He was quite old when he was elected to become pope. And so people were like, well, often this happens. Like if you're really, really old, they'll like make you become a pope, and they're like, well, he's not going to last long, so we'll be fine, if they're not too convinced. Like he wasn't coming from a family which had an old history of power. So I think that it served him well, the fact that he was old and people didn't think he was going to last that long. They thought he was just going to be like an intermediary pope. But he actually ended up lasting quite a while. He was a pope for 15 years, which is quite a while, okay, in those days. So he lasts as a pope for 15 years. And during this time, he does a lot. He's involved with a lot of things, and he has to deal with a lot of the things, like it's just his nature, but a lot of the things is like he finds himself in this position to have to deal with so much stuff, okay? So we mentioned in another video, he's the one that calls the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent is where we put together all the cardinals, which are, the cardinals which are supporting Luther, the cardinals that are supporting Catholicism, and we group them all together for a few weeks together in Trent, a few months actually, or years. They stay there for a long time to discuss how we can solve this division which has happened within the church, and hopefully find a resolution, which which, spoiler alert, they don't, because we have different churches right now. But he gives that a try, and other solutions that he finds to the problem of the Reformation is, so on one side he tries to make a resolution, but on other sides he creates the Inquisition, for example, to hunt down heretics and witches and all of that happy stuff. And he also founds the Jesuit, or he doesn't found it himself, but he promotes the foundation of the Jesuit order and allows it. So he's busy with a lot of things during his papacy. Now, he's also fighting the Turks. So all of this takes up a lot of his energy. He's also fighting very hard, like all popes of the Renaissance and everyone in the Renaissance, to make his family rise, to rise his family to a position of more and more power. And he positions his family very well. He marries off a lot of his family extremely well. He will also find himself at odds with his family in many cases. So, for example, there is a famous painting of Raphael, of him with his nephews and his sons that are kind of look a little bit shady on the side because they're actually rebelling against him. So he tries to help his family, but he also makes decisions that they don't always agree with, and they will also rebel against him sometimes. And in fact, it is said that it's the rebellion on behalf of his very sons that will bring his death at the very end. So he's busy with a lot of things, and all these things need money. So to fight Lutherans, to fight Turks, to fight and help your own family, you need money for all of this. So as all the popes from the Renaissance, he needs to make money somewhere. At least this time he's not spending money so much on partying, but he is on fighting, really. So one of the ways to make more money is to increase the tax on salt. And when he goes to Perugia, he lets Perugia know that he has decided to enforce the monopolium of salt also on this city, which, as I said, since the 1400s, they were free to purchase salt as they wanted. And as you can imagine, the people of Perugia are not happy, because not only are they being told that they're not going to have this, they're going to have this freedom taken away, basically, but the tax is even been increased. So they're going to go from purchasing salt however they wanted to having monopolium and being highly taxed on the purchase of salt. So initially, Perugia will try to defend its reasons in a more peaceful way. It will send representatives. It will try to kind of basically talk it through with Paul III, okay? This doesn't work. And also because, as I said, Paul III is quite strong-headed. Now, at this point, a very important family, which mostly has its houses in the southern part of the city, Perugia is disposed like on two hills. And in fact, the main street kind of is a bit like a saddle going in between these two hills. One of the hills is kind of pointing south, and that's the part of town where a particular family has most of its houses. And this is the Baglioni family, very powerful family, very important. They are looking to, well, first of all, not pay all this money for salt. And secondly, to maybe ride the people's discontent and use it to maybe gain some power for themselves as well, and maybe rid themselves of the Pope in many more ways, let's say. So they organize the resistance and the rebellion, rather, against Pope Paul III. Pope Paul III sends in his own son, Pierluigi Farnese, who is a great leader in combat, at the head of his army. And I mean, the Baglioni are very well organized, and the Perugini people are quite pissed off enough to put up a good fight, but it doesn't end well for Perugia. Perugia loses and loses all its independence as well following this. So not only will they not have the freedom when it comes to purchasing salt, but they lose all their other freedoms which they had as well. So it's not going to end well for Perugia, but it ends particularly badly for the Baglioni family, because Pope Paul III decides to use them as an example. Okay, he literally builds a fortress. We see this a lot during the 1500s, fortresses which are built not to protect the city where they're built, but to enforce power upon the city where they're built. And you recognize them because having been built in the 1500s, they look totally different than the fortresses that had been built before, because the warfare has changed. So the engineering behind the building of these fortresses also has to change. Any guesses on why that is? Firearms. So we start to have firearms during the wars and the battles of this period. So fortresses have to be totally different. They have to have slanted walls, and they have to be, just the construction is totally different. We have in Siena some examples, in Florence, fortresses that are to enforce power upon the locals rather than to defend the locals. And this is certainly the case for this fortress. This fortress, which is commissioned to Giuliano da San Gallo, which is one of the preferred architects for military buildings of the time. Pope Paul III commissions it to him, but the cool thing, it's not so cool for the people living through this, but the interesting thing is that the fortress is built right upon the homes of the Baglioni family. So a whole district of the town, which was mostly inhabited by the Baglionis, because these are big extended families, is used as foundations of the fortress. Now, if you come to Perugia, you can go inside, underneath where the fortress was, and I'll tell you why I'm saying was and not is in a moment. And you can literally, it's so weird because it looks like you're walking through the streets of this district, but you're not walking through streets because, you know, it's covered above you, and it's literally just the cellars of this fortress that was built right bang on the top. And you can see how arches of doorways of houses are just walled in and turned into the foundations of this fortress. So imagine what an example he was setting to other people that wanted to rise against him. Like, I will literally build on top of your homes and just like destroy everything. Isn't that incredible? So he builds this fortress. This is called La Rocca Paolina. And this fortress, looking south, looking towards Rome, was there for centuries. And the people of Perugia always saw this as the symbol of that power, of the papal power that was kind of like just right on their shoulders, like pulling them down a little bit. So the people of Perugia always had a particular kind of like, this power of the papacy, the political power I'm talking about. I mean, of course, they were religious and everything. It didn't affect their spirituality, but this is more from a political standpoint, right? So years later, so we have this beautiful fortress overlooking the countryside from one of the hills of Perugia. Then, when Italy was unified and finally Perugia was annexed to the Kingdom of Italy, the people of Perugia, excited from the fact of finally being able to rid themselves of the papal power, and I will put salt in my bread because I do not have to pay much for it at all. Finally, when they are able to rid themselves of the power of the papacy, what they decide to do is tear down the fortress. So if you go there today, you will see a bastion here, you will see a wall of it there, but most of the fortress, and you can walk through the foundations of it, and through the cellars of it and see where the Baglioni family homes used to be. But the fortress, the biggest part of the fortress was teared down by the people of Perugia in a moment of excitement at finally being able to rid themselves of the control of the papacy. And seeing that as the symbol of this power, they decided to tear it down. And And so 300 years later, a little bit more, the fortress, most of it was gone. So this is the story of the Salt War, the one that affected my area. If you know of any other conflicts concerning this fundamental product, let me know in the comments below. Oh, and for those of you who listen till the end, I will tell you now the real reason why historically we do not put salt in our bread in this area. Now, as I said, salt was very expensive. And with all these wars and taxes and all of these things happening, you didn't always know when you would be able to get your hands on salt and how much you would have. So it was very important that you dosed it well, and that you made sure you had it for the things you needed. And the thing for which you needed it the most was not bread, but it was for curing meats. Pork is a fundamental part of our cuisine of this area. Historians of gastronomy call it the king of the Middle Ages, and the pork would be killed in the winter, and then you would want to cure it so as to keep it. We didn't have freezers, so cure it so that you could have it for the rest of the year. And to cure it, you needed quite a bit of salt. So salt was fundamental for the treatment of this meat, which was a fundamental part of our gastronomy. And so you needed to use all of it for that. And this area, cured meats, prosciutto, salame, all of these things, very, very important part of our culture. And so you needed all the salt you had for this, and you couldn't waste it on bread, especially when you can make bread perfectly well without. And for this reason, we also have a lot of dishes in this area which are based on the kind of recycling of stale bread, hard bread from the day before. All right, so remember to subscribe, remember to like the video, remember to share it if you like. I hope you enjoyed it. This is The Curious Cat, and thank you. See you next time.